When I was in elementary school, I made my solo singing performance debut. To be honest, I don't remember much about the performance. I'm not sure there was much to remember, although I'm sure I left an impression on the people who were in the audience that day. Certainly, it was not quite like the beauty that we just heard. Thank you, David and Jeff. But while I don't remember much about performing as an elementary school student, what I do remember, what has stuck with me for more than 20 years now, is the song that I was singing. My fifth grade choir was singing a song titled "One Little Candle," written by a woman named Audrey Snyder. It was a sweet little song with poetic language, and it began with these words: "One little candle burning bright, one little gleam of radiant light, shimmering softly in the night, makes the darkness fade away." I don't know why that particular song has stuck with me all these years, but it is one little song that has stood the test of time and stays somewhere in the back of my head all the time. But particularly in the last couple of weeks, this song has come to the surface, and these words have come up again and again as I think about this homily tonight, as we planned this service of light, thinking about light and darkness. One little gleam of radiant light makes the darkness fade away. I suppose it's a message that, for me, connects me, even in some small childlike way, to the message of this scripture passage that we are hearing and using tonight. From the first chapter of the book of John, verse 5, you've already heard it read, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." The Gospel of John is full of light language, light imagery. Right away at the beginning of this book, we see Jesus referred to as the Word and as the light. Later in John, we hear Jesus himself use an I am statement to refer to himself as the light of the world. Here in this opening passage and numerous other places in John's gospel, we see this imagery for Jesus as light. And we see a dualism between light and darkness. The author of John begins this gospel with a prologue written almost like a hymn or a song. The opening passages are like a song written in this poetic form and could almost be broken down into stanzas, like a hymn that we would sing, to tell a story. And these opening passages tell the story of Jesus. They tell the story of God's relationship with humanity through Jesus. They tell the story of Jesus originating with the divine and then coming into the world and then making a home in the world. These passages tell a story of a new creation. They tell a story of light and of darkness. Now, I'm certain I don't need to introduce any of you to light and darkness. These are things we are intimately familiar with just by the rhythm of the world in which we live. With day turning to night and night turning to day, we're familiar with light and darkness. But those are the light and darkness of creation, literal light, literal darkness that we can see. And although I think that the author of John was in some way trying to refer us back to the creation story of Genesis, both books begin with "in the beginning." While that is true, I think the light and the darkness that are being referred to in the gospel are not the light and darkness that we see necessarily, but those that we feel. So let me ask you to consider for a moment the last time that you felt light. Some of you may have been recently on vacation, as Mia and I were at the end of the summer, and you went to the beach, and sitting on the sand next to the ocean, you quite literally felt the sun's rays warm your skin. That's the kind of light we could use on a day like this, to be honest. I think we might all enjoy being at the beach, feeling the warmth of the sun. But what about a different kind of light that we feel? What about light that we feel on an emotional level. When was the last time you felt light enter your soul and warm you from the inside? I think that one of the ways that we feel light in this way is through joy. Perhaps that's why we talk about joy and we say that someone's face lit up at a moment that they experience joy or pure happiness. Maybe you're a parent who's had a child away from home and you come downstairs one day to find that they've made a surprise visit to see you at home, and your face lights up with joy. Or maybe as you stand at the front of a church and you watch your soon-to-be spouse walk down the aisle and you see them for the first time and your face lights up with joy. I think that's the person who lights up my life. I know for me, and the day that I married Mia and the day our son Bates was born are two of those days where joy lit up my life, and you could see it on my face. I felt light in those moments through joy. But what about darkness? Darkness is a feeling of another kind, isn't it? Darkness has a way of creeping up on us or of hitting us all at once. Just as light does, darkness manifests itself in a variety of ways, some much more painful than others. Darkness can show up through a difficult medical diagnosis when we see and hear the doctor say, "I'm sorry, but it's malignant." Or at the loss of a job when the uncertainty comes and we are not sure where we will make ends meet or what we will do next. Darkness can rear its ugly head in the way we feel about ourselves or in the hatred we feel towards someone else. Darkness hovers over addiction and violence and oppression and injustice. We understand light, and we are just as familiar, perhaps too often, with darkness. Perhaps like many of you, one of the most profound ways that I have personally experienced darkness is through the death of a loved one. The loss of someone we love, as many of us know all too well, can be one of the most painful and gripping ways in which we experience darkness. In the midst of grief, it can feel as though light is absent, even if we know otherwise. And the truth is that light is, in fact, there with us. We just sometimes need help finding our way back to it. It's already been alluded to, but as many of you are certainly aware by now, next week is Halloween. And as Aaron began to tell us, Halloween has a particular tradition that goes back long before what we know Halloween to be today. So do you know where Halloween comes from? In its origin, October 31st, or Halloween as we now know it, is in fact the evening before the Christian holy days of All Saints' Day, also known as All Hallows or Hallowmas, on November 1st, followed by All Souls' Day on November 2nd, thus giving the holiday on October 31st the name All Hallows' Eve, that is, the evening before All Hallows' Day. These 3 days are collectively called All Hallowtide and are time for honoring the saints and for praying for the recently departed souls. Many of the traditions of Halloween that we know today, even some of the door-to-door and the lighting candles inside of gourds and such, are actually derived from much older traditions of observing All Hallowtide. See, since the time of the early church, many Christian feasts, these major feasts such as Christmas and Easter and Pentecost, had vigils that began on the night before, as was the custom for the Feast of All Hallows. In many cultures and customs, these vigils included the lighting of candles. And for All Hallows' Eve, this in particular was a tradition of lighting candles in honor of those who had died and had gone before us. We light a candle in the memory of those as a way of shining light on a dark moment and signifying that their memory still lives on and burns brightly. What may be even less familiar to you than All Hallows' Eve is the observance and the Remembrance Day that happened last Monday, October 15th. On that day, a particular candlelight vigil took place all around the world in homes. You see, since the late 1980s, when it was designated officially by President Reagan, October is and has been Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And October 15th is the time and the day of remembrance observed by those who have experienced pregnancy loss and infant death. The day is observed with remembrance ceremonies and candlelight vigils, concluding with what's called Lights of Love International Wave of Light, a worldwide lighting of candles that encompasses and spans the entire globe at exactly 7 p.m. local time in each place on October 15th each year. This year, Mia and I joined in this wave of light. Sadly, we have experienced the pain and the darkness of losing a pregnancy twice this year. And so we, like many of you, have had to say goodbye to a little one for whatever reason, we just were not meant to meet. And so last Monday, after putting Bates to bed, we sat around our darkened dining room table and we lit 2 small candles, one for each loss. And we sat in the light of those candles and we prayed and we cried and we mourned. But something remarkable happened in that space. You see, just as the darkness of our dining room was overcome by 2 small lights of 2 candles, the darkness of our grief was overcome by the light of hope. Hope for what may be, hope for what may yet come, and hope for what already is. Our prayers turn to those of thanksgiving for one another and for Bates and for what may be. Our grief certainly was not gone, you see, but light moved us in a new direction. It pointed us towards something new. And light moved our darkness and our pain from grief and pain to grace and peace. Light has a way of doing that with darkness, doesn't it? One little candle burning bright makes the darkness fade away. I said earlier that I think that light feels like joy, which I believe to be true, and I also feel and believe that light feels like hope, and that hope is in large measure what Christ brought into this world and continues to shine into it. Light is considered pure. It dispels darkness. It nourishes life. It illuminates everything. Light is often showing us something new or pointing us in a new direction. Sometimes light is showing us what we were not able to see when we were in darkness. Sometimes we learn more about the power of light by having been in the darkness. Barbara Brown Taylor, in her book, Learning to Walk in the Dark, talks about her own experiences with darkness and what she learned about it and what she has learned from it. Here are just a few of her words. Even when light fades and darkness falls, as it does every single day in every single life, God does not turn the world over to some other deity. Even when you cannot see where you are going and no one answers when you call, this is not sufficient proof that you are alone. There is a divine presence that transcends all your ideas about it, along with all your language for calling it to your aid, which is not above using darkness as the wrecking ball that brings all your false gods down. But whether you decide to trust the witness of those who have gone before you, or you decide to do whatever it takes to become a witness yourself, here is the testimony of faith. Darkness is not dark to God. The night is as bright as the day. We know that darkness is a part of our world and that darkness will come into our lives again and again. But as children of light, we place our faith in the one for whom darkness is not dark. We place our hope in the fact that even when we find ourselves in darkness and it seems that light is nowhere to be found, God is with us, pointing us back toward the light. The one who created light in the beginning has sent us the light of the world, and that light is leading us towards a new day, illuminating us as we go. After all, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. And what a gracious light that is. Thanks be to God. Amen.